Hi everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're settling into a medieval army camp on the kind of night you wouldn't wish on your least favorite co-worker. The kind where the cold doesn't simply sit in the air but actively hunts for the smallest gap in wool, leather and courage, and where a tent, just a sagging shell of canvas and poles, becomes the closest thing to a palace a soldier will see for weeks. Before we crawl inside, take a second to get comfortable, dim the lights a little, and let your shoulders drop. And if you're enjoying these slow, immersive stories, you can like the video and subscribe. And if you feel like it, tell me your location and local time down in the comments, because it's genuinely fascinating to picture where in the world you're listening from, while we all share the same quiet night together. Now, let's step forward into the camp. You reach the edge of the encampment, and the first thing you notice is that the warmth isn't really warmth at all. It's a fragile illusion made of firelight and bodies, because the wind still threads between every rope and stake and finds your ankles the moment you slow down. And yet the camp feels like safety because it has shape, it has routine, it has flickering circles of orange light where men hunch with their hands extended, and it has that low, steady sound of an army trying to rest without ever truly sleeping. And then you see the tents, and if you're imagining modern nylon that seals you into a neat little cocoon, it helps to let that picture drift away, because medieval campaign tents were often heavy linen or canvas stretched over wooden poles, sometimes patched with leather, sometimes greased, sometimes stained dark from smoke, and sometimes sagging with moisture as if the fabric itself were exhausted. And when you duck inside one, you don't enter a clean room so much as a living bundle of damp wool, smoke, sweat, and shared breath. The ceiling is low, forcing you to crouch, and the ground beneath you is either half-frozen earth that feels like stone through your bones, or churned mud stiffening into ridges, depending on whether the day gave you rain or snow. And the moment you settle, the cold starts negotiating with you in tiny, persistent ways. First by slipping up through the ground, then by swirling along the floor in thin drafts, then by condensing in the air you exhale, turning your own breath into a ghost that lingers beneath the canvas roof. One plain, solid historical reality is that medieval armies did not always pack up and go home when autumn arrived, because wars rarely respected seasons, and campaigns pushed into late fall, and sometimes deep into winter, and when they did, a tent became less a comfort and more a piece of logistics, something hauled on carts, bundled with poles, and assigned by rank, with nobles and commanders claiming larger pavilion-style tents, while ordinary foot soldiers crowded into smaller shelters that were often little more than a windbreak with delusions of privacy. And in that crowded darkness, the first true enemy of sleep isn't just the cold, it's the ground, because air temperature is one problem, but the earth is another entirely. And the earth is patient, and it will take heat from you for hours without ever getting full, which is why the most important technology for not freezing wasn't always the canvas above, but whatever you could build beneath. You start to notice it immediately. Layers. Always layers. And not in the neat modern sense, but in the desperate medieval sense, where insulation is whatever exists nearby, and can be dragged, stuffed, stacked, or stolen. So men spread straw, rushes, bracken, pine needles, even broken shields laid flat to lift a sleeping body off the frozen soil. And if you've ever camped and learned the hard way that a sleeping pad matters more than the thickness of your blanket, you can almost feel how intensely true that would be here, where the ground wants to steal the warmth right out of your spine. You lower yourself down, and the tent groans softly with movement, ropes creaking, stakes complaining in the earth, and the smell hits you in layers too. Smoke first, then damp wool, then leather, then the faint sourness of bodies that have been marching for days, and you realize that this is not a room, it's a shared organism, a small breathing pocket of humanity trying to stay alive until morning. And in that pocket, the second piece of survival arrives without anyone needing to announce it, because it's obvious the moment you try to stretch out and discover you can't. Closeness. Medieval soldiers, when the cold turned cruel, often slept packed shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, like people who understood a simple truth that no philosopher needs to explain, which is that one body can lose heat quickly, but a pile of bodies becomes a furnace, uneven and smelly and uncomfortable, yes, but real. And the moment you wedge yourself between two cloaks and feel that faint radiating warmth seep into your ribs, your shivering eases just enough for your jaw to unclench. It isn't friendship, not necessarily, and it isn't romance, and it isn't even kindness in the clean sense. It's a transaction made by winter, a silent agreement that says, tonight we share heat, because pride is worthless when frostbite starts nibbling at toes and fingers, and because the tent, on its own, is not a warm place. It's just a place where the wind is slightly less interested in you. You pull your cloak tighter, and it scratches your chin, the rough fibers catching on dry skin, and you can feel the dampness in it too, because wool keeps warmth even when it's not perfectly dry, which is why it was a lifeline on campaign. And as you wrap it around your shoulders like a stubborn, itchy cocoon, you begin to understand why chroniclers so often mention men sleeping in their cloaks, why even higher-ranking soldiers sometimes gave up anything resembling bedding, because the cloak was clothing by day and survival by night, and if you had one good cloak, you had at least a fighting chance against the dark. Still, the tent breathes cold, and as you settle, you start to hear the camp in its nighttime language, a low chorus of coughing, the occasional mutter, a snore that saws through the canvas like a blunt blade, the soft rustle of straw under shifting bodies, and outside, the fire crackles with that hungry, uneven sound that tells you it won't last unless someone feeds it. And that's where the third truth of not freezing begins to take shape, because it isn't just about what you lie on or what you wrap around yourself. It's about what the camp does as a living machine, the rhythm of fire. Even if you don't leave the tent, you feel the fire's presence like a distant heartbeat, because the warmth outside is never constant. It swells when fresh wood is thrown on and fades when the embers collapse. And in many camps, men rotated not only guard duty but fire duty too, stumbling out half asleep to coax life from coals with trembling hands. Because a dead fire in a winter camp isn't just inconvenient, it's a threat. Sometimes, if the rules and the risk allowed it, someone might drag a small brazier or a pot of banked coals nearer to the tent flap. Not enough to make the space comfortable, but enough to take the knife edge off the air. And even then the comfort comes with a shadow, because smoke in an enclosed space steals breath while it gives warmth, and canvas burns fast if a spark lands wrong. And every soldier learns sooner or later that medieval survival is always a trade. Warmth for danger, dryness for stink, sleep for vigilance. You lie there listening, your eyes heavy but not fully surrendered, and you realize something else that makes this night harder. You can't fully undress. Your boots stay on, not because they're comfortable, but because frozen boots can become wooden shells by morning, and swollen feet don't like to fit back into stiff leather, and the simple act of taking them off can turn into an irreversible mistake. So men sleep with laces still tied, toes cramped, socks damp, the smell sharp and sour, and they accept it because discomfort is better than losing the ability to march. And while you're trying to settle, the tent keeps teaching you in small humiliations, like the way condensation forms from breath and clings to the canvas roof, like the way frost can outline seams by dawn, like the way a tiny draft finds your neck, no matter how carefully you wrap your cloak. And yet, inch by inch, the human body does what it always does when it must. It adapts, it curls inward, it reduces exposed surface, it tucks knees up to trap warmth, it steals heat from neighbors without apology, and eventually, even in this imperfect shelter, sleep begins to arrive, not as a smooth wave, but as a series of slow, reluctant dips into darkness. And just before you drift, with the fire crackling somewhere outside, and the tent shifting softly as men settle into their own tight bundles of wool and fatigue, you get the clearest understanding of the answer to our question, at least the first part of it. Medieval soldiers didn't sleep in tents without freezing because tents were warm. They slept without freezing because they treated warmth like a puzzle made of many small pieces. Insulation beneath, wool around, bodies together, fire nearby, boots on, movement minimized, and endurance as the final layer when all the other layers failed. And in a moment, as the camp quiets and the night deepens, we're going to keep going, because the next things that kept them alive weren't just materials, but habits. How they arranged the tent, how they rationed the fire, how they handled wet weather, how they dealt with lice, how they survived broken, segmented sleep, and how belief itself, prayers, charms, simple superstitions, became one more blanket in the dark. You don't remember when sleep finally took you, only that it came in fragments, as if the body itself had forgotten how to rest, and now you wake to the muffled sound of men moving in the dark, the faint scrape of boots on frozen earth, the low moan of canvas, as the wind pulls and releases it like a living thing breathing outside your shelter. The air feels thicker than before, heavy with smoke and the sour musk of damp wool, and the ground beneath you has turned hard, the straw flattened into a rough, uneven mat that crackles when you shift. You breathe out, and your breath becomes a small ghost above your face, white and fleeting, rising toward the roof where it disappears into the cold. For a long moment you lie still, listening to the strange orchestra of the camp, the distant hiss of wind threading through the guy ropes, the pop of fire beyond the flap, the wet cough of someone who has been sick for days, the faint, rhythmic clinking of armor, hung up to dry by men too tired to care that it's icing over. When you finally push aside the flap, the world outside looks both alive and dead, a field of frost and dim light where the fire burns low, its embers pulsing like a tired heart. Around it, the soldiers crouch close, their faces carved in red and shadow, hands extended as if they're reaching for the sun itself. The fire doesn't roar, it sighs, every log collapsing inward, every spark drifting upward only to vanish into the black. And yet that glow, faint and fragile as it is, holds the entire camp together because here in the medieval night, the fire is not a luxury but the last line between living warmth and frozen stillness. Chroniclers who marched with kings or followed crusades wrote endlessly of these fires, rings of them marking the heart of an army, their smoke drifting above fields like prayer rising from 1,000 throats. And if you stood far away and saw that glow from a hill, you would know that down there in the dark, an army was surviving, one ember at a time. Sometimes soldiers tried to make the warmth last longer than the night. They scooped glowing coals into clay pots or even helmets, banked them with ash and carried them under cloaks so they could spark them again at dawn without striking frozen flint. You can imagine the sight, a man cradling a pot of embers like an infant, his breath fogging above it, his gloved hands trembling as he guards that fragile inheritance of heat. It was as dangerous as it was necessary. Too much smoke inside a tent and you could choke before you ever woke again. Too little, and the fire died, leaving only the hard cold to fill its place. The fire in a medieval camp was not comfort. It was negotiation, a constant truce between flame and frost. When you crawl back inside the tent, the air feels almost soft by comparison, though it smells of everything a man wishes he could forget. Wet leather, grease, old sweat, and the faint metallic tang of smoke trapped in fabric. Someone has dragged a small brazier near the entrance, a pot filled with glowing coals that hum with gentle heat. The red light paints the faces around you in shifting color, eyes half closed, jaws slack with fatigue, hands cupped to the glow. For a moment the scene feels almost sacred. Men hunched around fire like monks around a relic, their shadows stretching long against the canvas walls. A few have dropped pine needles or herbs into the coals, and the air carries a strange sweetness amid the stink, something like rosemary and ash, a scent that belongs neither to comfort nor battle but somewhere between. You remember reading once that soldiers believed certain herbs could drive away both lice and evil spirits, and you realize that it doesn't matter which danger they feared most, cold, pestilence, or demons. The ritual of burning herbs gave them the illusion of control, and illusion, on nights like this, was warmth enough. Because fire and wool could only do so much. What truly kept a man alive in this kind of night was something deeper and quieter, a belief that he wasn't alone. The tent is proof of it. Look around, charms tied to the poles, bits of string and bone and cloth hanging where the light catches them, small tokens from wives, mothers, or comrades lost in other winters. Some are carved with crosses, others with crude symbols no priest would recognize. Yet every one of them hums with meaning. Soldiers whispered prayers before sleep, muttered the names of saints between coughs, or pressed relics to their lips, not because they were certain of protection, but because certainty itself was a kind of warmth. Faith became another layer, like a cloak or a pelt, invisible but felt in every breath. You reach out and touch one of the charms, a knot of cloth hardened with soot and wax, and you feel the faint oil of skin on it, passed from hand to hand, a relic of desperation that has survived longer than reason. In the dim red light, one of the men starts to hum, his voice rough and unsteady, a song you can't quite place, half lullaby, half prayer. Another joins in, then another, until the tent fills with a low murmur, a trembling harmony that rises and falls with the sound of the wind outside. It isn't tuneful, not really, but it has rhythm, the rhythm of men reminding themselves they're still human. Somewhere in that noise is a promise that the cold can't touch, the promise that no one will face it alone. And as you listen, your body sinks lower, the sounds and smells blending into a single heavy atmosphere of survival. You feel the warmth of the brazier on your face, the cold pressing at your back, the rough wool scratching your chin, and in between those sensations lies the fragile miracle that defines the medieval night, the human will to endure, not through comfort but through closeness, through shared breath, through fire, and through faith. Outside, the wind still prowls around the camp, shaking ropes and scattering ash. But inside, for a brief hour before dawn, there is peace. Not warmth exactly, not rest, but a kind of surrender that passes for both. You close your eyes and breathe in the mingled scents of smoke, rosemary and sweat, and as sleep returns, heavier and deeper than before, you understand something you didn't when the night began. The tent itself is not what saves them, nor the fire, nor the cloak. It is the belief, ancient, wordless, persistent, that even in the most merciless cold, there is still warmth to be found in the nearness of other living souls. You wake again, though this time it's hard to tell whether you ever truly slept or simply drifted in and out of a dream, woven from the same smoke and breath that fills the tent. The air feels heavier now, still and stale, and when you inhale you taste ashes on your tongue, faint, bitter, almost metallic. The fire outside has burned low, and what light remains seeps weakly through the seams of the canvas like veins of dull gold. The men around you lie tangled beneath their cloaks, some motionless, others muttering softly, their words dissolving into the slow rhythm of their breathing. The brazier near the flap still glows, a cluster of half-dead coals pulsing faintly, casting enough warmth to fog the air but not enough to stop your fingers from stiffening. You stretch your hands toward it, and for a moment the sensation of heat feels like grace, fleeting, almost imagined, and yet you cling to it as if it might reach your heart if you just hold still long enough. This is how medieval soldiers survived the night, not through comfort but through constant negotiation with misery. Every ember was a prayer, every layer of wool a boundary between flesh and frost. Fire was both salvation and threat. One spark could save you or consume the tent in seconds, and everyone knew the difference between warmth and danger was measured in inches and luck. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War describe camps that went up like torches when sleep dulled a century's attention, the canvas burning faster than voices could rise. And yet, without fire, death came quieter, slower, a creeping numbness that stole strength from the core outward, until even breathing felt optional, so they accepted the risk. Fire had to live, even if it demanded constant sacrifice. You glance toward the entrance and see movement beyond the flap, the faint silhouette of a man crouched beside the central pit, feeding another log onto the coals. He moves carefully, like a priest performing a rite, coaxing warmth from the ashes, whispering curses or prayers. Sometimes it's hard to tell which. Sparks leap briefly, and the glow deepens, painting his face in flickering light that makes him look centuries old. Behind him, the rest of the camp flickers like a low constellation across the frozen ground. The tents, the armor, the men, all of it held together by fragile heat. When you draw the flap closed again, the cold rushes in with you. A living thing. Someone near your left stirs and groans, pulling his cloak tighter. Another shifts against your back, and in that press of bodies you find warmth again, human and immediate. It's strange how quickly disgust gives way to gratitude, how the same man whose smell you cursed earlier now becomes your lifeline. Survival here is communal, whether you want it or not. You share breath, space, and body heat, until you forget where one life ends and the next begins. And this intimacy isn't born from affection, it's born from arithmetic. The hard logic of cold. Alone, you die. Together, you might not. Chronicles of crusading armies described men sleeping like dogs, packed in heaps beneath sodden cloaks, their combined heat forming a living furnace that kept death at bay until dawn. Some called it brotherhood, others humiliation, but both words mean the same thing when the air bites hard enough. You close your eyes and listen again to the tent. There's the rustle of wool, the creak of wooden poles, the sighs that escape when men sink back into uneasy dreams. One of them mutters the name of a woman, another lets out a sharp laugh, short and hollow, as if his body remembered humor even when his mind forgot how. From somewhere near the brazier comes the faint, rhythmic scraping of metal. A soldier sharpening a knife not because he expects battle, but because the sound itself keeps him awake, keeps his hands moving, keeps the cold from setting in too deep. Outside, the wind shifts direction. You hear the faint clinking of armor hung on racks, the restless shuffle of horses stamping the ground. The fire's glow pulses against the tent wall like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, fragile. You pull your cloak tighter, tucking the coarse fabric under your chin, and the smell of it fills your nose. Sweat, smoke, lanolin, the ghost of rain. It's unpleasant, but it's yours. Every fiber has absorbed the story of the march. The snow, the damp fields, the nights spent crouched beneath it. And now it serves again, heavy but faithful, your only companion that never sleeps. Somewhere near your feet you feel a shift, something pressing close. You glance down and see a camp dog curled tightly beside you. Its fur coarse and streaked with ash. It must have slipped in during the night, drawn by heat and smell. The others barely notice. A few even smile faintly in their sleep. The dog exhales, a long, soft sigh that fogs the air, and nestles closer against your legs. The warmth it gives off is astonishing, alive in a way no cloak or pelt can imitate. You reach out and rest your hand on its flank, feeling the fast rhythm of its breathing, and in that moment you understand something profound, that survival in these nights wasn't about strength or courage, but about proximity, to fire, to warmth, to anything still living. As your eyes grow heavier, you think of the charms swaying from the poles, bits of cloth, fragments of bone, small wooden crosses carved by trembling hands, and you realize that faith, too, was a form of insulation. It wrapped the mind the way wool wrapped the body, creating a space where fear could be contained, if not conquered. Some men clutched rosaries, others muttered pagan blessings learned from their grandmothers, and still others whispered nothing at all, only held a small token in their fist, and believed it mattered. Belief was warmth. Doubt was frost. The brazier hums softly, its last embers glowing in rhythmic pulses, and outside the fire crackles, throwing shadows that dance across the canvas like ghosts of every soldier who froze before you. You know dawn is still far off, that the coldest hours always come just before it, and yet, as you close your eyes again, you find a strange peace in the thought. The tent may leak, the fire may fade, but the world beyond its thin walls can wait. Inside there is breath and heat and faith. For now, that is enough. When you wake again, the world has changed its color. The fire outside is nothing but a dull glow now, reduced to red crumbs among the ash, and the air feels heavier, as though the entire camp is holding its breath. The first thing you notice is how damp everything has become. The canvas above your head glistens with a thin film of condensation, beads of water gathering along the seams and then falling at random, tiny icy drops that sting when they hit your face. The smell has changed too. Smoke and sweat and wet wool all tangled together into a single heavy odor that clings to your hair and your hands, no matter how much you rub them clean on your cloak. You breathe through your mouth, and the air tastes like iron and old embers. It's the smell of a night that's lasted too long. Around you, men begin to stir. The sounds are small at first. A groan, the scrape of a boot, a cough buried in fabric, and then they merge into a quiet symphony of discomfort. Someone mutters a prayer, another curses softly, another fumbles for the flask that's rolled away in the straw. You sit up slowly, feeling the stiff ache in your spine from sleeping on the frozen earth. The straw beneath you has flattened into a damp mat, but it's still better than nothing. You brush a few brittle stalks from your cloak, and your fingers tremble as you do, the joints swollen and pale from cold. You glance toward the tent's entrance and see the faint glow of dawn pushing through the fabric. Not warm sunlight, just a paler kind of darkness. The storm has stopped, but the silence it leaves behind is heavier than the noise. For a moment, no one speaks. The men are waiting for someone else to move first, as though rising from the ground is an admission that the night is over, and the next ordeal has begun. You can see their breath hovering above them, small clouds in the dim light, proof that they're still alive but not yet ready to act like it. Someone crawls toward the brazier and stirs the ashes, blowing gently until a few sparks flicker back to life. The coals respond sluggishly, exhaling a faint warmth that makes everyone lean toward it without thinking. You stretch your hands out and feel the blood returning, painful and slow, your fingertips burning as sensation creeps back in. That tiny pot of fire becomes a sun in miniature, the center of the tent's fragile universe. It radiates just enough heat to lift morale by a fraction, to convince every man here that he can survive another hour. And this is what survival really looked like. Not glory, not valor, not shining armor in the snow, but this, a handful of shivering men crouched around dying coals, wrapped in cloaks that smell of animals and smoke, trading quiet jokes about frostbite and fleas, just to hear their own voices break the silence. The medieval chroniclers could fill entire pages with tales of courage and piety, but they rarely mentioned what courage actually felt like in the body. The sting of cracked knuckles, the pain of frostbitten toes that never fully warmed again, the trembling that never quite stopped, even when you thought you were safe. You can hear one soldier near the corner whispering to another about home. He's describing the hearth in his father's house, how the stones glowed orange and the dog slept beside it, how the smell of bread drifted from the oven at dawn. The man beside him laughs, but it's not mockery, it's longing. They all know what that warmth feels like, even if the memory hurts to touch. For a moment everyone is silent again, and you realize that memory itself has become another kind of fire, flickering inside the mind when all the real ones fade. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling how heavy it has become, stiff in some places, damp in others. It clings to you like a second skin, rank with sweat and lanolin, and yet it is your only armor now. You think of how many soldiers before you have wrapped themselves in the same kind of wool, how many nights they whispered the same complaints, and how little has changed in the long history of human endurance. The materials shift, linen, leather, canvas, but the instinct is ancient to huddle close, to guard the ember, to wait for dawn. Outside, you hear the faint rattle of armor as the first sentries begin their morning patrols. Horses snort and stamp the ground, shaking frost from their manes. A crow caws in the distance, a sound sharp enough to cut through the thick air. You know that soon the tents will be pulled down, the fires scattered, and the army will move again. A line of weary shapes trudging forward through another day of frozen mud and grey sky. For now, though, you stay still. You let your eyes close again. If only for a few moments more, you feel the heat of the coals fading, the cold pressing closer, the quiet breathing of men who, like you, are pretending the world outside doesn't yet exist. And in that silence, in that small smoky space suspended between night and day, you understand what it truly meant to sleep in a medieval tent without freezing to death. It wasn't a single trick or invention or secret. It was the stubborn refusal to surrender. It was the fire that refused to die, the dog that pressed closer, the cloak that stayed wrapped, the prayer muttered without conviction but with hope. It was the collective heartbeat of men who for one more night chose to endure. You rise slowly, the stiffness in your limbs making even the simplest motion feel like the first act of a battle. Every joint cracks as though frozen from within, and your cloak, which served as your only blanket through the long night, clings to you like wet bark. The smell of smoke has settled deep into its fibers, mingling with the faint sweetness of straw and the bitter tang of sweat. When you push the flap of the tent aside, a surge of pale morning light stings your eyes, not warm sunlight, but the bleached, almost metallic gleam of dawn on frost. The world outside is silent, motionless, the camp transformed into a small city of ghosts. Every tent, every pole, every rope is stiff with ice. Even the horses look sculpted from steam and breath, their hides shining with a thin film of frost as they stamp the frozen earth. For a moment you just stand there staring. The fire pits have burned down to ash, the coals dull and lifeless. A few men crouch over them, blowing weakly, hoping to coax a spark from what's left. Others are rubbing their hands together, slapping their arms, or simply staring into the distance with the expression of men who know that the day ahead will be long and hard and indistinguishable from the one before it. You can hear the brittle crunch of boots in the snow, the dry creak of wagon wheels starting to turn, the faint metallic clatter of armor plates being fastened over stiff linen and frozen padding. Every sound is sharp in the cold air, as though even noise has grown brittle. This is what historians never quite capture when they write about medieval warfare. The mornings that come after the battles, the hours that exist not in glory but in frostbite and fatigue. The chroniclers wrote about victories and banners and the courage of kings, but not about this. The way fingers fumble with laces too stiff to tie, the way breath burns the throat like smoke, the way a man's soul feels older every time he wakes to another colourless dawn. The real campaign is fought not with swords but with endurance. You look down at your boots, cracked and stiff, and remember the old rule that everyone in camp knows: never take them off, not even to sleep. The leather has turned as hard as wood, and it takes effort just to bend your feet inside them. Beneath the soles you can feel the straw shifting, flattened by hours of standing and marching, and your toes ache with that peculiar mixture of pain and numbness that means the blood is still moving, but only barely. You stamp your feet to bring them back to life, and for a moment you can almost feel warmth again, though it fades as quickly as it came. The men around you are beginning to move now, folding cloaks, shaking frost from their hair, packing away tents that feel more like sheets of stone than fabric. The rhythm of the camp returns with slow inevitability, ropes coiled, poles pulled, embers scattered, every movement part of a choreography learned by repetition rather than thought. The officers shout in low voices, their words drifting like smoke. Horses snort, harnesses clink, and the first lines of the column begin to form against the pale horizon. Somewhere nearby, a soldier pours a thin stream of ale into a cup, the liquid catching what little light there is. He passes it to another man, who drinks quickly, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and nods in silent thanks. Alcohol has become the camp's second fire, a warmth you can swallow, a few seconds of courage in liquid form. They all know it dulls more than pain. It dulls thought, memory, fear. You can smell it on their breath when they speak, mingling with smoke and frost. For a few minutes after drinking, the world seems less sharp, less cruel. And then the cold returns. It always returns. You pull your cloak tighter and look up. The sky above is grey and thin, the kind of sky that gives nothing, no snow, no warmth, just an endless blank that seems to press downward. The wind picks up again, dragging little spirals of ash across the frozen ground, tugging at the loose ends of the tents that haven't yet been packed. You see one of them collapse in slow motion, its ropes snapping with a dry twang, the canvas folding inward like a defeated flag. 2 soldiers rush to fix it, cursing under their breath, their movements clumsy from exhaustion. And in that moment, watching them struggle, you realize that survival itself is the real campaign, not the battles or the marches or the banners, but this daily fight against the simplest elements of the world. Every soldier here has learned to bargain with the cold, to trade comfort for another day of breath, another sunrise. It's not heroism, it's habit. The human body adapts because it must. The human spirit endures because there's no other option. You step forward, your boots sinking slightly into the frozen mud, and for the first time you notice the tracks that the army has left behind. Deep, wide trails of churned earth and ash that stretch into the horizon like scars. Behind every step lies a night like this one. The smoke, the cold, the tent sagging beneath frost, the endless rhythm of breath and fear, and faint laughter. The march continues not because anyone chooses it, but because stopping would mean surrendering to the frost. As the line of soldiers begins to move, you fall in with them, the ground crunching underfoot, your cloak heavy on your shoulders, your mind drifting somewhere between exhaustion and numb calm. The camp shrinks behind you, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and the whisper of the wind moving through empty ropes. And as you walk, you understand, perhaps for the first time, that the real miracle of those medieval winters wasn't survival through strength or armor or faith. It was the simple, stubborn act of getting up, again and again, no matter how cold the night had been. The march begins not with a trumpet or a shout, but with the slow crunch of hundreds of boots pressing into frost, a dull rhythm that spreads across the field like a heartbeat awakening after a long paralysis. The world is colorless, sky, earth, tents and men all fading into the same shade of grey, and every sound seems to echo farther than it should. Metal clinks against metal, horses exhale clouds of white steam. Somewhere far off, a cartwheel groans under frozen weight. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the rough wool grind against your neck, and you realize it has stiffened during the night, the edges rimmed with ice. Each fold crackles faintly when you move. You breathe through your mouth because your nose stings with the cold, and every breath leaves your tongue tasting faintly of smoke, leather, and ash. All around you, the army reshapes itself into motion, as if drawn forward by some invisible thread. The tents, once alive with flickering firelight, now stand deflated and half buried in frost, their canvas sheets being torn down by numb fingers. Men stumble as they lift the wooden poles, ropes frozen stiff as iron, their breath rising in grey gusts that vanish instantly. Behind them, the last campfires smoulder in shallow pits, orange coals beaten dull by wind, and when the ashes are scattered, the smoke curls briefly upward, mixing with the breath of the departing column, until everything seems to merge into one long exhalation of human fatigue. The officers ride along the flanks, their horses cloaked in frost, shouting orders that are mostly lost to the wind. Every command sounds more like a plea than a command, as though even authority has grown brittle overnight. The soldiers obey in silence. They always do. They shoulder their packs, lift their shields, adjust their belts, and begin walking without looking at one another. The first few steps are the hardest, frozen joints creaking, boots crunching, every muscle rebelling against movement. But soon the body remembers its rhythm, and the army moves as one slow, grinding creature dragging itself through the grey dawn. You look down and notice that the ground beneath the snow is a patchwork of frozen mud and straw, the remnants of last night's bedding trampled into the soil. Each footprint leaves behind a faint trace of steam as the warmth of the steppe meets the cold of the earth. The smell of smoke lingers on everything. on the wool, the breath, even on the air itself, and for a moment it feels as though the entire world has been burned down to its essentials: fire, earth, and endurance. Someone near you mutters a joke about the sun being too lazy to rise, and a few men laugh, not because it's funny, but because laughter is the only thing that still belongs to them. Another soldier, his hood drawn tight over his head, begins to hum under his breath, a thin, tuneless hum that sounds less like music and more like the ghost of a melody. The sound carries quietly through the ranks, and for a few seconds it fills the frozen air with something fragile and human. It's gone almost as soon as it began, swallowed by the wind, but it lingers in the mind, a small act of defiance against the cold. As the column stretches forward, the frost underfoot begins to melt into a thin layer of mud, sticky and cold, pulling at the soldier's boots with every step. You can feel the weight of it, how it tugs you down as though the earth itself resents your movement. But no one stops. No one ever does. Every soldier knows that stopping is the first step toward freezing, and freezing is the first step toward dying. So they walk, heads bent, shoulders hunched, their cloaks flapping like tattered sails in the wind. And then, for a moment, you catch sight of something beautiful. If beauty can exist in a world this barren, the sun finally pierces the clouds, just a narrow blade of gold cutting through the grey. It touches the tips of helmets and spears, glints briefly on the frost still clinging to the horses' manes, and turns every wisp of steam into a column of fire. The light lasts only a few seconds, but in those seconds the army looks transformed. Not a horde of tired, half-frozen men, but a moving river of gold and silver, alive, determined, unstoppable. You close your eyes for a moment and let the light strike your face. It isn't warmth, not really, just the illusion of it. But the illusion is enough. You remember that warmth doesn't always come from fire, and strength doesn't always come from armor. Sometimes it comes from movement, from habit, from the stubborn refusal to give in. You take another step, and then another, and the ground crunches beneath you like breaking glass. The camp fades behind you, the smoke dissolving into sky, and ahead lies only more winter, more cold, more road. But as the wind rises and the frost glitters faintly in the weak sunlight, you realize something small but certain. They did not survive these nights because they were fearless, or strong, or blessed. They survived because they moved forward, one aching step at a time, carrying their fires not in their hands but in their hearts. And though the cold bites at your face and the air cuts like a knife, you can't help but think that in its own strange way this too is warmth. The kind born not of fire or shelter but of endurance itself. By midday the frost has begun to loosen its grip, turning the hard, glittering ground into a slow chaos of mud and meltwater, the kind that clings to boots and swallows footprints as soon as they're made. The sun, pale and exhausted, hangs low above the grey horizon, its light weak and watery, but it's enough to change the colour of the world from silver to brown, from stillness to motion. The army stretches in a long, uneven line, men walking in silence except for the dull rhythm of their steps and the occasional creak of leather or cough muffled in a sleeve. Smoke still drifts faintly from the place where the camp had stood that morning, twisting into the cold air like a memory that refuses to vanish. You glance back once over your shoulder and see it fading, the trampled snow, the blackened circles where fires had burned, the broken ropes stiff with frost. What was a world of survival only hours ago now looks like the ruins of a dream. You can almost hear the echo of last night, the crackle of coals, the low hum of voices, the sigh of a horse shifting in sleep. It's astonishing how quickly a place can lose its life, how warmth can vanish without leaving a trace. All that remains is the smell of smoke, the universal perfume of soldiers who have seen too much winter. Ahead, the column moves slowly through a low valley lined with bare trees. Their branches are thick with frost, their silhouettes thin and bony against the washed-out sky. Every gust of wind shakes loose, a flurry of white dust that drifts across the ranks like falling ash. A rider passes close to you, his cloak whipping in the wind, his face hidden behind a woolen scarf. The horse's breath rises in plumes, and for a second it looks as though both man and beast are half spirit, half smoke. The sound of hooves fades quickly into the snowmelt and mud, swallowed by distance. By now, the numbness has spread through your body so evenly that it no longer feels like pain. Your fingers don't belong to you, your feet are two stones strapped into leather, and yet you keep walking because the body remembers what the mind forgets, that motion is survival, and stillness is death. Around you, the same silent understanding governs everyone else. The march has become its own kind of prayer, one step after another, steady as a heartbeat. From time to time, someone stumbles, catches themselves, and keeps going without a word. A man ahead of you sneezes violently, then wipes his nose on his sleeve and laughs dryly, as though the sound itself might thaw something inside him. Another pulls his hood tighter and mutters a few words under his breath. Not curses this time, but a fragment of a psalm, half remembered from childhood, murmured into the wind. You realize that in an army like this, belief doesn't come from books or sermons. It's carved into the rhythm of the march itself, into the instinct that tells men to rise after every fall. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings. It's not a church bell, it's a cowbell, tied to one of the supply carts. The sound drifts faintly through the air, strange and haunting, a reminder that life still exists beyond this endless grey. The men glance up for a moment, their eyes following the sound as though it were a star. Then they lower their heads again and keep walking. The road ahead stretches into the mist, vanishing where the light fades. You can see the outlines of a forest at the edge of the valley, dark and dense, its trees huddled together like an army of their own. That's where the next camp will rise, where new fires will be built, where the same rituals will repeat, the same straw laid over frozen soil, the same coals guarded through the night, the same breath shared under canvas and wool. It will all happen again, as it has happened 1,000 times before. And yet, as you walk, something inside you shifts. You begin to understand that this routine, the cold, the movement, the endless cycle of frost and thaw, isn't a punishment. It's the structure that keeps everything from breaking. The tent, the fire, the march, the faith, they are all versions of the same thing, the same stubborn thread of life stretched through the centuries. The medieval soldier, trudging through the snow, isn't so different from you, or anyone who's ever endured a long winter of the soul. You lift your face to the wind, and for a brief moment you feel the faintest trace of warmth on your skin, not from the sun, but from your own blood moving again, slow but alive. The world is still frozen, still grey, still merciless, but it is also awake. The army ahead of you keeps moving, a long, shivering serpent of humanity, and behind you the traces of their steps already begin to fade into the mud. The cold will come again tonight. The tents will rise again, the fires will burn low, and the same breath will turn to frost inside the same fragile canvas walls. But none of that matters now, because you've seen the secret written in the rhythm of the march, that survival is not the absence of suffering, it's the refusal to stop. And as you follow the column into the fading light, your cloak flapping behind you, you realize that for all its cruelty, winter can never truly claim the living. The cold takes everything except motion, and motion is enough. By the time the sun begins to dip once more, the day has already blurred into a long corridor of cold light and motion, as if time itself has frozen along with the ground. The army moves through open fields where snow has melted into streaks of grey slush, and the ruts from wagons have hardened into uneven ridges of ice. The horses snort and pull against their harnesses, their hooves breaking through the thin crust with every step. The men march without speaking, each trapped within the quiet rhythm of his own endurance. It isn't exhaustion anymore, it's something slower, deeper, like the body has learned to obey the cold rather than fight it. When the order finally comes to make camp, the relief isn't loud, it's a ripple of small movements. The first tent stakes driven into frozen soil, the first logs unloaded, the first spark struck against flint. Within minutes, the grey field begins to breathe again. Smoke rises from dozens of fires, faint at first, then thicker, curling through the air in long ribbons of blue and brown. The men move like shadows among them, their shapes bending and stretching in the firelight. The crackle of burning wood returns to the soundscape of survival, the same steady rhythm that has marked every evening of the campaign. You drop to your knees and begin to gather straw for bedding, your fingers stiff but methodical. Each handful rustles like dry parchment, and the sound feels almost comforting. It's strange to realize how your mind has changed, how things that once meant poverty or discomfort now mean safety. A bit of straw, a patch of cloth, a spark in the dark, each is precious beyond gold. When the ground is finally covered, you spread your cloak over it, testing its weight, pressing your hand to feel how the layers trap a pocket of warmth. It's not much, but it's something. As the fires grow stronger, faces begin to appear in the glow, hollow-eyed but calmer now, the tension of the march dissolving into small gestures of normalcy. A few men cook what little they have, a handful of oats, a strip of dried meat softened in a tin cup of water, the smell of smoke and fat mixing in the air. Others sit quietly, repairing straps or boots, or rubbing their hands near the coals. One man removes a small wooden cross from his neck and holds it over the fire for a moment, letting the heat warm the wood before pressing it to his lips. No one mocks him. In the cold, faith is as practical as any tool. You look around and realize the camp, for all its weariness, has taken on a certain beauty. The tents stand like pale shells against the dark, the snow around them glittering faintly in the firelight. Smoke drifts low, trapped beneath the air that's too heavy to carry it away. Somewhere, a soldier begins to sing again, his voice raw and cracked but steady. Others join him, not loudly but in that quiet shared tone of people who know the song by heart, even if they've forgotten the words. The sound rises and falls like wind over distant hills, echoing faintly across the frozen plain. The song fades, replaced by murmured conversation, laughter even, brief but real, bubbling up like a spring beneath the ice. Someone tells a story from home, about a tavern, a wife, a harvest, something far away and absurdly normal. For a few minutes the camp feels almost human again. You find yourself smiling without meaning to, though the smile feels foreign on your face. The fire crackles. A spark lands on your sleeve, leaving a tiny hole, and you brush it away with the back of your hand. The gesture feels ancient, automatic, the same one made by 1,000 soldiers before you. Later, when the fires burn low and the camp grows quiet again, you lie down on your straw bed and pull the cloak up to your chin. The air inside the tent is thick with smoke and breath, but it's warmer now, softer somehow. You can hear the slow breathing of the men around you, the occasional sigh or muffled cough, the faint clinking of armor shifting as someone turns in his sleep. Outside, the wind moves across the field with a long, low hum, pressing gently at the canvas. The world is cold, vast, and silent, but inside this small circle of fabric and firelight, there is life. You close your eyes, and in the darkness behind them you see flashes of warmth, the glow of the brazier, the gold flicker on the tent walls, the pale breath of a horse rising into the dawn. You remember the march, the frost, the endless sound of footsteps on frozen earth. And then softly it all begins to fade, replaced by the slow rhythm of your own heartbeat, steady as a drum in the distance. Tomorrow the cold will come again. The fires will die and be reborn. The march will continue. But for this one night, you have outlasted the winter. You have made it through the darkness and found within it something almost holy, a peace carved not from comfort but from endurance. And as sleep finally takes you, heavy and dreamless, the camp settles into its own heartbeat, pulsing softly against the cold, 1,000 living souls breathing in unison beneath the endless sky. By dawn the cold has returned, sharp and absolute, as if the night had never loosened its grip. The fire outside is a grey skeleton of ash, and the world beyond the tent is once again a landscape carved from frost. You wake before the call, before the shouts of the officers or the neigh of the horses. Because the cold itself wakes you, it seeps through the layers of straw and wool, and finds your skin like a hand pressing against your spine. For a moment you lie still, half inside a dream where warmth still exists, and then the sounds begin. Boots scraping, ropes creaking, low murmurs of men dragging themselves upright. The tent smells of breath and smoke and damp earth. Every inch of canvas is wet to the touch, glistening with condensation that falls in slow, deliberate drops. You rub your hands together and feel the roughness of your palms cracked and stiff from frost and labor. When you sit up, your cloak falls from your shoulders like a sheet of stone. It's frozen in places where it absorbed melted snow. You beat it against your knee until the stiffness breaks, small flakes of ice scattering into the straw like dust. Outside, the horizon glows faintly with the first light of day, a line of pale fire spreading across the frozen fields. The air is so cold it burns the inside of your nose when you breathe. You step out and the camp unfolds before you, rows of tents sagging under frost, horses stamping and tossing their heads, men huddled around small new fires that refuse to catch. Everything is quiet except for the wind which sighs through the camp like a tired god surveying the living. You walk toward the main fire pit, where a few men have already begun their ritual, blowing gently on the coals, feeding them with slivers of wood and strips of bark. The fire struggles, flickers, then finally opens one red eye. Its warmth is small, almost imaginary, but it's enough to draw everyone closer. Hands extend into the heat. Faces lean forward, eyes half closed. The smoke stings, but no one moves away. It's not comfort they seek, but proof. The proof that warmth still exists somewhere, that the world hasn't frozen entirely. The officers pass through the camp, their cloaks snapping in the wind, their words curt and low. Orders are given. Fires will be doused, tents packed. The day's march awaits. The same motions repeat, rolling cloaks, tying straps, tightening belts, shaking the frost from armor. You can hear the soft creak of wood as wagons begin to shift, the clank of chains and the sharp cry of a mule refusing to move. It's a strange kind of music, this prelude to endurance, the morning song of men who have forgotten what it means to be warm. You find a small tin cup and dip it into the pot near the fire. The water is half frozen, its surface filmed with ice, but when you lift it to your lips, it tastes faintly of smoke and ash and iron, and you drink it anyway. A soldier beside you passes around a crust of bread, hard as stone. He breaks it into pieces with his knife, and laughs quietly when it splinters. At least it won't go bad, he says, and the others smile, not because it's funny, but because it's human. Laughter is a kind of fire too. As the camp comes alive, you feel the same rhythm returning, the slow heartbeat of survival that carried you through yesterday and the day before. It's not courage that moves the men, not faith, not loyalty. It's something simpler and far older. Habit. The body's instinct to keep moving, no matter how cold the world becomes. You feel it too, that dull, relentless pull forward, the whisper that says, stand up, take the next step, light the next fire. When the last tent is packed and the fires are scattered into snow, the army begins to move again. The line stretches out across the plain, long and thin and ghost-like in the morning mist. Each man leaves behind a small cloud of breath that hangs in the air like a trace of his passing. The ground crunches underfoot, frozen and unyielding. Somewhere behind you, the ashes of the camp smolder faintly, their smoke rising into the grey sky, the last heartbeat of the night you've survived. You take one last look back before turning to face the road ahead. The frost on the canvas glitters like 1,000 tiny mirrors catching the sun. The tents, the fires, the laughter, the prayers, all of it will vanish within an hour, swallowed by wind and distance. But the memory will remain, the smell of smoke, the warmth of shared breath, the fragile miracle of endurance. And as you walk forward, the wind at your back, you realize that this is what it has always meant to live through winter. Not to conquer it, but to meet it, to match its silence with your own steady pulse, and to keep moving until the world softens again. The tent, the the fire, the march, they are all lessons written in frost. You carry them with you now, invisible and eternal, like heat in the bones. By midday the frost begins to yield, though only slightly, and the world turns slick and heavy beneath the army's feet. The air smells of thawing earth and smoke, and as you march you can hear the steady drip of melting ice from the edges of the trees. It's not warmth, not yet, but the promise of it. A slow exhale from the frozen landscape that feels almost merciful after so many nights spent locked in silence. The men walk with their cloaks slung low, the hems darkened by mud, and the clinking of armor blends with the rhythmic squelch of boots sinking into the softening ground. You pass the remnants of the last camp, blackened fire circles, half-buried bones, a forgotten stake leaning like a broken tooth in the soil. The wind pushes against your back, faint but persistent, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke, and something older, a smell that seems to come from the bones of the earth itself. Around you, the soldiers move like a single weary organism, each man shaped by the same hunger, the same fatigue, the same stubborn refusal to fall behind. No one speaks, but the silence feels communal, a pact of endurance stronger than words. As the afternoon drags on, clouds gather thickly over the valley. The light dulls to a grey wash that flattens the world, turning trees and tents and men into shades of the same colour. The sky feels close, pressing down on the camp as it forms again on the next stretch of frozen ground. There's no ceremony now, just instinct. The first men begin hammering stakes while others unroll the stiff sheets of canvas that have travelled with them for weeks, stained with soot and patches of frozen grime. Fires are struck again, their thin trails of smoke curling upward like faint prayers, and before long the landscape looks almost the same as last night. Another cluster of tents, another circle of embers, another moment carved from endless repetition. You crouch near the fire, holding your hands close enough that your palms begin to sting. The heat radiates weakly, more suggestion than substance, but you savor it anyway. Across the flames, a young soldier is sewing a tear in his cloak with clumsy fingers. His hands shake from cold, the needle catching the light every time it flashes through the thread. Beside him, another man sharpens his dagger, the rasping sound slow and deliberate. No one talks much anymore. Even laughter, when it comes, sounds hollow, as if it takes too much effort to carry warmth in sound. A pot of stew boils nearby, its contents unidentifiable, the surface filmed with grease and smoke. The smell makes your stomach tighten. It's not pleasant, but it's food, and food is hope. Someone dips a ladle into the pot, fills a wooden bowl, and hands it across the circle without looking up. The exchange is wordless, mechanical, but in its quiet way it feels sacred, like the passing of a relic from one survivor to another. As night falls again, the rhythm of the camp returns to its familiar pattern. Fires dim to embers, shadows stretch long and uncertain. You crawl back into the tent, straw crackling beneath you, and pull your cloak high around your shoulders. Outside, the wind shifts direction, colder again, sweeping across the fields with the low whistle of winter, reclaiming what little it gave. You listen to it for a long time, the way you might listen to an enemy too far away to see but close enough to sense. The man beside you mumbles in his sleep, something about home, about light, about bread still warm from the oven. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you. It's strange how the human voice, even half dreaming, can make a place feel less empty. The tent smells as it always does, smoke, damp wool, the faint sourness of sweat, but somehow it feels different tonight, not softer, but more familiar, more lived in, like a shell that's learned the shape of its occupant. And as you drift towards sleep, the thought comes to you, slow, heavy, almost tender, that perhaps this is how men survive not just war, but the long winters of their lives. Not by winning against the cold, but by learning its rhythm, by finding comfort in discomfort, by making peace with endurance itself. The canvas trembles above you, the coals whisper, and for the first time in many nights, The darkness doesn't feel hostile. It just feels vast and ancient and patient, like something that has watched soldiers sleep for centuries, waiting to see who will rise again at dawn. By nightfall, the air had grown heavy again, thick with the kind of cold that seemed to settle inside the lungs and stay there, an invisible weight pressing down from within. The fires in the camp flickered low, their glow turned copper and dull, barely touching the walls of the tents around them. The sky stretched endless above, neither clear nor cloudy, a pale void where no stars dared to show themselves. The soldiers moved through it slowly, shadows of men rather than men themselves, each gesture mechanical, each movement dictated by routine rather than thought. You could feel it in the way they stacked their shields, the way they folded their cloaks, the way they crouched beside the last warmth of the coals, all of it done with the quiet resignation of people who have long since accepted that comfort is not coming. You pull your own cloak tighter, feeling its rough wool scratch your chin, still faintly damp from the melted frost of the morning. The ground beneath you is a frozen tapestry of footprints, hardened ruts from boots and hooves, the surface glittering faintly with thin crystals of ice that crack and sigh under pressure. The camp is still alive, though barely 100 murmurs, the shuffling of straw, the creak of armor settling as men lower themselves to rest. There's something strangely peaceful in that sound, a soft percussion of exhaustion that fills the night like rain might fill a roofless house. Someone nearby strikes flint against steel, coaxing a spark from stone. The faint click, the hiss of smoke, the sigh of breath all blend into a rhythm you've heard every night for weeks. It is the music of survival, fragile but unbroken. The small flame catches, flickering in the hands of its maker, then leaps onto a bundle of straw, a handful of twigs. Light spills out again, touching faces, shoulders, the edges of weapons lying idle. The men gather close without speaking, their expressions unreadable, the same mix of relief and weariness you see everywhere. The fire reflects in their eyes like distant stars trapped in wells of fatigue. The smell of burning wood wraps around you, earthy and sharp. It clings to everything now, to cloaks, to skin, to hair, and even though it stings the throat, it has become a comfort, a scent that means warmth, life, motion. You close your eyes and breathe it in, remembering how once back home, fires had other meanings, feasts, laughter, stories told without fear. Now it is only function, but even function feels sacred when the world is made of cold. Somewhere at the far edge of camp, a horse neighs softly, followed by the jingle of tack. A guard shifts near the outer line of tents, his boots crunching through frost, his breath puffing white in the dark. The camp is a heartbeat in a frozen field, fragile, rhythmic, and stubbornly alive. You can almost see it from above, a scattering of embers glowing red against the pale ground, each tent a shell, each man a flicker of warmth trapped beneath linen and willpower. Inside your own tent, the air is close, thick with the scent of smoke and wool. You lie down carefully, letting your weight settle into the straw until the sharp edges give way to a shallow cradle. Around you, the others are already asleep, their breaths rising and falling in imperfect unison. One man snores softly, another murmurs words in a language you don't know. Their sounds fill the space between your thoughts until you no longer feel alone. The canvas walls shudder when the wind passes, sighing like some great creature exhaling. Every so often a drop of melted frost slides down the seam and lands on your cheek, cold enough to sting. You pull the cloak higher, tucking it under your chin, and try to imagine warmth, not the memory of it but the idea, as if by picturing it you could conjure it into being. You imagine the coals outside still glowing, you imagine the dog that curled against you 2 nights ago, you imagine the sun as more than a pale ghost waiting beyond the horizon. For a long while, sleep refuses to come. Your eyes trace the shadows above, watching how the faint firelight wavers through the canvas like veins of gold in dark stone. Every gust of wind bends the fabric inward, as though the world itself were breathing against the walls. And then, slowly, the edges of thought begin to blur. The cold remains, but it feels softer now, dulled by exhaustion. Your body surrenders before your mind does, sinking into that half-dream where sound and memory fuse. In that fading moment, you think of how many soldiers have lain like this, beneath the same sky, under the same canvas, with the same quiet ache for warmth. You realize that this story isn't just yours or theirs, but something older, something woven into the long rhythm of humanity itself. The tents, the fires, the cold, they're all echoes repeating across centuries, the unending conversation between men and winter. And as you finally drift into sleep, you understand that perhaps this is what it truly meant to survive in the medieval camp. Not to conquer the night, but to share it, to endure it together, to close your eyes knowing that the fire outside still breathes for you all. By the time dawn breaks again, the light is no longer gold or gentle. It's white, cold and sharp enough to hurt the eyes. It falls across the camp like a thin blade, illuminating the frost that has formed overnight on every surface, turning helmets, spears and tent ropes into threads of silver. You blink against it as you crawl from beneath your cloak, your breath rising in plumes that seem to hang frozen in the air before vanishing. The ground crunches beneath your palms as you push yourself upright, every joint stiff, every muscle heavy as stone. The fire has burned down to little more than a dark ring of ash, and for a brief moment you stare at it, unwilling to move. The silence of the early morning feels different than the silence of the night. At night, the quiet was alive with breath and whispering fires. Now it's hollow, empty, as though the world itself is holding its breath. Somewhere nearby, a man coughs, dry, ragged, the sound of lungs scorched by smoke and frost. Another mutters something about the horses, his voice hoarse and low. The rest of the camp begins to stir, slow and reluctant, like a great beast waking from uneasy sleep. You step outside the tent and see the first figures moving, shadows wrapped in wool and fatigue, faces half covered by scarves, hands trembling as they reach for frozen ropes and collapsed poles. The sound of metal echoes softly as armor is lifted, as if even the weapons themselves groan at the cold. One soldier, his beard rimmed with frost, bends over the embers and breathes into them with desperate patience. It takes several tries before the first thin tongue of flame returns, licking the edge of a blackened log. A ripple of relief passes through the men nearby. The horses stand silent, steam rising from their nostrils like smoke from dying fires. Their eyes are dark and wide, their bodies trembling beneath blankets stiff with ice. You walk to one and rest your hand against its flank, feeling the rough warmth of life beneath the frozen hair. It shifts slightly, its breath brushing against your face, and for a moment the exchange feels almost holy, the warmth of a living creature shared like a blessing. Across the field, the commander's tent opens, and an officer steps out, his cloak gleaming with frost. Orders are shouted, distant and clipped. Men begin to pack what little they have, their movements mechanical, rehearsed through repetition and necessity. The rhythm of the morning begins again. Pack, lift, march, survive. You look down at your own hands, red, raw, cracked from the cold, and flex them slowly. The skin feels like parchment, the joints stiff and uncooperative. You pull your gloves back on and tighten the strap of your cloak around your shoulders. The fabric smells of smoke and salt, and faintly of animal fat from the grease rubbed into its seams weeks ago to repel water. The scent has become part of you now, inseparable from the person you were before this endless cold began. The camp is dismantled piece by piece until nothing remains but the ghosts of footprints and the blackened circles of last night's fires. The wind sweeps through, erasing the marks almost as quickly as they're made. You watch as the last tent comes down, its canvas folding like a shroud, its poles clattering together with the sound of distant bells. And then the march begins once more. The column moves through the valley in single file, the soldiers hunched beneath the weight of their cloaks and weapons. The snow has crusted over in the night, and every step breaks through it with a dull crunch. The sound repeats endlessly, crunch, 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 until it becomes the heartbeat of the army. You glance to the side and see a line of trees glittering with frost, their branches thin as glass. Beneath them, a frozen stream lies silent, its surface fractured in places where hooves or boots once crossed. You catch your reflection for a moment in one of those shards of ice, a pale face, hollow-eyed, older than it should be, and for a fleeting instant you don't recognize yourself. But the feeling passes, as all feelings do in the march. You lower your head, pull the cloak tighter, and keep walking. Around you the air hums faintly with the sound of breath and movement, the quiet endurance of men too cold to speak and too determined to stop. Somewhere far ahead, the faint clang of a bell marks the pace. Somewhere far behind, the echo of a cough fades into the wind. And as the day stretches out before you, you understand the rhythm of it all. The tents, the fire, the frost. They aren't moments of suffering, but chapters of the same endless lesson. The medieval soldier did not win against the cold. He simply learned to carry it, to make it part of him, to keep walking through it until the earth itself thawed. You look up once more, toward the horizon where the pale sun struggles against a sky of steel. It will never rise high today, never truly warm the world, but it is there, and that is enough. The march continues, boots striking against frozen mud, and for the first time in days, you feel something that might almost be hope. Not the loud kind that burns, but the quiet kind that endures, the kind that keeps men moving when the world has forgotten how to be kind. By afternoon, the army has found higher ground, a stretch of frozen ridge where the snow lies thinner and the wind moves more freely, carrying with it the faint smell of pine and distant wood smoke. The march slows as the terrain grows uneven, each step a negotiation between rock and ice, each breath a small victory. The sun, pale and hard as a coin, slides across the sky without warmth, casting long shadows that seem to stretch forever across the white expanse. From above, the soldiers must look like a trail of ants moving across an endless frozen table, minute, insignificant, yet unstoppable. When the command is given to halt, it comes not as a shout, but as a wave of relief that ripples down the line. Packs drop, men slump. A few fall to their knees, too tired even to unbuckle armor. The horses lower their heads, steam rising from their bodies like mist from a river. The air hums with the quiet sounds of exhaustion. Sighs, boots scraping against ice, the faint metallic clink of weapons settling. You stand still for a long moment, your chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm, listening to your own breath rasping in your ears. Then, slowly, the same ancient ritual begins again. The first poles are raised, the same stiff canvas unrolled, the same fires coaxed to life from trembling hands and numb fingers. The sound of flint against steel rings out across the ridge like 1,000 tiny bells, followed by the faint hiss of breath as sparks catch dry twigs. It's a rhythm older than any commander, older even than war itself, the ritual of men building a home from nothing but their will to survive another night. You kneel to clear a patch of frozen soil, pushing aside crusted snow until you reach the hard, dark earth beneath. Your fingertips ache, but there's a certain satisfaction in the motion. It feels purposeful, almost meditative. When the ground is bare, you lay down the same thin layer of straw, spread your cloak over it, and watch as your breath curls in the cold air like smoke from an invisible fire. Around you, voices murmur low and tired, men speaking in fragments, half words, shared jokes, small curses tossed like coins into the wind. A few tents away, someone begins to sing again, a low, gravelly hum that barely rises above the whisper of the wind. The melody is simple, almost childlike, and though no one joins at first, before long others pick it up. The sound swells gently, wrapping around the camp like a threadbare blanket. You recognize no words, yet the tune is familiar in its sadness, a hymn not to victory but to endurance itself. For a while it fills the spaces between the tents, echoing softly against the white ridge and the hollow sky, before fading back into silence. You sit by the fire with a small tin cup, watching the water inside it tremble as it warms. The coals glow orange beneath the blackened wood, sending up lazy spirals of smoke that smell faintly of resin. The warmth barely touches your face, but you lean closer anyway, closing your eyes as the first faint sting of heat spreads across your skin. The world narrows to that single circle of light, to the small hiss of snow melting on embers, to the dull throb in your fingers as life trickles back into them. When you finally open your eyes again, the light has begun to fade. The horizon burns briefly with a line of red, then sinks into violet, then into grey. The wind sharpens, cutting through layers of fabric and flesh alike. The fires dim, one by one, until only their dull glows remain, like the last sparks of stars reflected in ice. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling its weight settle over your shoulders like memory, and glance at the men around you. Some are already asleep. Others sit staring into the dark as if trying to see beyond it. The night descends quietly, but not kindly. The wind grows bolder now, tugging at the canvas, creeping through seams, whispering through straw. Yet you no longer flinch from it. You've learned its voice, the low, endless murmur of the world, reminding you that you are still small, still mortal, still here. You lie back slowly, feeling the straw shift beneath you, the cold seeping up from the ground but dulled now by fatigue and habit. As you close your eyes, the last thing you hear is the faint crackle of a distant fire and the slow rhythm of breathing all around you. Dozens of men sleeping close together, their bodies and dreams layered like cloth against the cold. Somewhere beyond the ridge, wolves begin to howl, their cries long and hollow, but they sound far away, unreal, like ghosts calling from another age. You pull your cloak over your head, bury your face in the rough fabric, and let the sound fade into nothing. The world contracts again, to breath, to heartbeat, to the smell of smoke, and you drift at last into the shallow sleep that has no dreams, only the quiet hum of survival. And in that moment, as the cold wind prowls outside and the fires sink to embers, the line between soldier and shadow, between man and memory, blurs until there is only one truth left: that warmth, no matter how brief, is worth the night it costs. By the time the next morning drags itself over the ridge, the camp looks like a graveyard of ghosts, tents sagging under new frost, footprints frozen solid, every colour bleached pale beneath the iron sky. The air feels heavier than before, thick and unmoving, as if the whole world has stopped breathing for a moment. Somewhere a raven caws, the sound sharp enough to slice through the stillness, and the men begin to stir, their shapes slowly rising from the snow, like the dead called reluctantly back to life. Your body aches with a dull, familiar weight. Each limb feels borrowed, each movement a negotiation with pain. When you sit up, your cloak cracks where it froze during the night, and a few flakes of ice slide down your shoulder and into your collar. You blink against the pale glare leaking through the tent flap and taste iron in the air, blood from your chapped lips, smoke from the dying fires, frost itself made sharp on the tongue. You crawl outside, squinting into the light, and for a moment everything is silent except for the soft crunch of boots moving across the snow. The camp's fires have burned down to pale beds of ash, their warmth long since devoured by the dawn. The men huddle around them anyway, cupping their hands as if to remember what heat once felt like. Faces are drawn tight with fatigue, lips cracked, beards thick with frost. No one talks much anymore. Words have lost their shape in this cold, and everything that needs saying is said through motion, through the slow tightening of belts, the pulling on of boots, the lifting of packs. A few paces away, a group of soldiers are breaking ice in a wooden bucket, smashing it with the hilts of their daggers before dropping the shards into their mouths to melt. The sound of metal on ice rings faintly across the camp, rhythmic and harsh. One man spits out a sliver of frost and mutters that it tastes cleaner than the rivers back home. The others laugh, dry and hollow, not because it's funny, but because laughter, even thin and brittle, still feels alive. The horses snort and stamp, their breath rising in thick white plumes, their hooves scrape at the frozen ground, impatient, miserable, yet obedient. Someone feeds them handfuls of grain dusted with frost. They eat slowly, their movements mechanical like everything else here. Every living thing in this camp has become part of the same machinery of endurance. As the order to break camp echoes out, men move like clockwork, pulling ropes, folding canvas, stamping out the last embers with boots still lined in straw. You can smell the faint sweetness of burning pine mixed with sweat and smoke, the scent of another night survived and another day waiting to devour whatever strength remains. The sound of wood snapping, of stakes pulled from frozen soil fills the air, small explosions of noise in the otherwise suffocating quiet. You turn your gaze toward the horizon. It's endless and grey, a smear of light where land and sky dissolve into one another. Somewhere out there, beyond the next ridge, lies the next camp, and beyond that another just like it, and beyond that perhaps spring or something that passes for it. You don't think about it too hard. The future, like warmth, is a luxury too distant to chase. One man beside you coughs into his sleeve and mutters that he dreamed of his wife's hearth last night, the smell of bread, the flicker of clean firelight. He smiles when he says it, but there's no joy in the smile, just the ghost of something that once mattered. You nod, though you don't answer. Dreams like that are dangerous here. They soften the will. The march begins again, as it always does, slow and unyielding. The snow crunches beneath hundreds of boots, the rhythm steady, almost meditative. The line of men snakes down from the ridge and vanishes into the white plain below, swallowed by mist and distance. The sound of it, the collective movement of leather, steel, and breath, becomes the only song left. And as you walk, you realize that the cold has become part of you now. It no longer bites. It simply exists, like a shadow that never leaves. The tent, the cloak, the fire, the night, they are all pieces of the same lesson that comfort is temporary, but endurance is eternal. The medieval soldier didn't defeat winter. He became fluent in it, learned its language, its silences, its slow mercies. You tighten your cloak and keep your eyes forward. The frost gleams like powdered glass across the field, and though the wind cuts your face raw, you keep walking, because that's what survival has always meant. Not warmth, not rest, not even hope, but movement. The act of taking one more step into the cold, knowing the fire behind you is gone, and believing that somewhere ahead another will be lit again. By dusk the march has ended in a place that barely deserves a name, just a hollow between two hills where the wind dies a little and the snow lies thinner. The soldiers fan out silently, their movements slower now, deliberate, as though each man has become an echo of himself. No one needs orders. The same routine unfolds like a memory etched into bone, tents raised, cloaks beaten free of frost, the small defiant act of fire coaxed to life again. The flames sputter at first, orange and uncertain, but then catch, their glow painting the weary faces gathered around them. You sit by one of those fires, hands spread toward the heat, eyes half closed. The warmth isn't strong, but it's enough to make your fingers ache as the blood returns. The air smells of pine resin, leather, and smoke. The light dances against the canvas walls nearby, and for the first time all day the world seems to soften around the edges. Beyond the ring of light, the night presses close, vast and empty, but here, just here, there is life. A few men speak quietly, voices low and hoarse. Someone tells a story from home, a harvest, a wedding, a child learning to walk. Another laughs softly, the sound brief and tired but genuine. The dog from last night wanders between the fires, tail wagging, accepting scraps and curling up against whichever soldier has the warmest lap. When it finds you, it settles with a sigh, its fur hot against your shins, and you reach down to scratch behind its ears. The animal's weight anchors you to the earth, a small reminder that warmth still exists in forms that have nothing to do with fire. Above, the sky begins to clear. The first stars appear, faint and hesitant, then brighter, until the heavens bloom into a frozen sea of light. The cold deepens, but it no longer feels cruel. The fires reflect in the snow like constellations fallen to earth, and for a moment you can't tell where the sky ends and the camp begins. Every man here looks upward at least once, faces tilted toward that unreachable glow. No one speaks. The silence feels sacred, as if the night itself has paused to acknowledge them, to acknowledge their persistence. You realize, sitting there, that the tents are not prisons, nor are they salvation. They are symbols of something older and more stubborn. The simple, relentless will to live. Canvas, straw, smoke, breath, body heat, all of it woven together into a fragile barrier between humanity and oblivion. It was never about comfort. It was always about endurance. The fire pops, sending a brief shower of sparks into the air. You watch them rise and vanish, glowing for a heartbeat, then lost to the dark. That's what every night has been here. Tiny flames in an endless winter, brief and beautiful, enough to keep men alive one more day. You pull your cloak tighter and lie back on the straw, eyes fixed on the stars. The cold seeps through the fabric, but you no longer fight it. You let it in, the way all soldiers must, until it becomes part of you, something to carry, not something to fear. Around you, the camp quiets again. The fires dim, and the rhythmic sound of breathing returns, the low collective heartbeat of survival. And in that stillness, as sleep begins to pull you under, you finally understand the truth that every medieval soldier learned in the end. That warmth was never in the fire, nor in the cloak, nor even in the tent. It was in the nearness of others, in shared breath, shared endurance, shared faith that morning would come. You close your eyes, the dog pressed against your legs, the fire whispering its last quiet song, and as the stars wheel slowly above the frozen world, you drift into the kind of sleep that belongs only to those who have earned it. Deep, dreamless, and unbroken. The wind moves across the camp, tender for once, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and the soft sigh of resting men. And when dawn comes again, it will find them still there, alive together, and warm enough to endure.